When students returned to campus that fall of 1964, they were very surprised to find that the university had taken this hardline stance against activities which had been going on at Bancroft and Telegraph for many years. When Clark Kerr returned from the Far East, he also was very surprised to find sheriffs had taken this action without consulting him and had essentially ended what was known as the Sathergate tradition, because before the university expanded from Sathergate to Bancroft and Telegraph, students used to be able to set up the card tables just outside Sathergate. So now they were doing it at Bancroft and Telegraph. Sheriffs had just ended that whole tradition. Foremost among the students who were upset about this new policy were those who had been involved in the civil rights movement, particularly Mario Savio, Jack Weinberg, and others. Savio, for example, had been in Mississippi that summer, working in the civil rights movement, the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, risking his life to help bring civil rights to blacks in the South, and encouraging blacks to take great risk and to register to vote in the face of physical threats from the white establishment there. And when Savio returned to Berkeley and discovered that the university would not allow him or anybody else to hand out a flyer for a civil rights group or collect quarters for the cause, they were very upset about this. And they tried to negotiate with the administration, to no avail. And eventually it led to a confrontation that became known as the free speech movement.
Civil rights activity was escalating. We were picketing the Oakland Tribune. We were picketing the Republican National Convention, two of Nolan's babies. Now, you have to understand the background. Many of the people either were involved in civil rights work that summer or were currently being trained. One of the major tactics of the civil rights movement was nonviolent and sitting down. Sit down. Right before you get to the entrance of the university, the brick extends in 15 feet. Then there were pillars, and that's where the university started. The university gave that land to the city. The legal paperwork was never finalized. So UC Berkeley thought it belonged to the city, so they didn't think they had any jurisdiction over shutting down this activity.
And we used to get permits from the city under the First Amendment to set up tables and hold rallies and things like that, because everybody believed that that was city-owned property. And the city just regulated. They were only trying to regulate so you didn't have tables on top of each other, so to maintain pedestrian access.
They discovered that it was still university property, and they had the right to tell us what to do. The assumption was that it was in loco parentis, at the university was your guardian. They had control over you like your parents. That was their assumption. Every organization on campus was registered. So the dean sent us a letter explaining that that was university property and that it can no longer be used for soliciting political money, organizing people, making carpools. That strip could no longer be used for political activity. And when that happened, a lot of organizations, talked about it and got together from right wing to left wing and people in the middle, because it affected the young Republicans as much as it affected CORE and SNCC. They were organizing people to support Goldwater. The United Front got together and started holding meetings, big meetings, like 40, 50 people. It was a whole spectrum, political spectrum. But I know that they hit a stone wall. I mean, they weren't listened to, they weren't respected, they weren't always seen, they were sometimes shut out. And so there was just growing frustration among the organizations. The FSM was like a segue. Our goal, our focus, our passion was to create more equality and justice among the races and the classes. And the university came in and said, stop. So we're running. And finally we run into a brick wall. They say, you can't do this anymore. And we're like, what? Why? And that's when our energies were diverted to getting our right back to organize, to getting our political rights back, our free speech back. FSM took a lot of our focus, took a lot of energy.
The deans came out and they took our names for sitting at the tables. And that first time that they began taking names, we set up the tables where they had been, and we set them up, and we called ourselves the United Front. So this is about September 20th, 21st, the beginning of the fall semester.
And, who was in this United Front?
Oh, everybody, man. The Republicans, even the Goldwater Republicans were part of this. The Scranton Republicans, all the Democratic Party. It was the youth for Scranton, the youth for Goldwater, mm-hmm. and then all the socialists, the Young Socialist Alliance, the Du Bois Club, CORE, all the civil rights groups, Friends of SNCC, the Congress of Racial Equality, were all part of this, what we call the United Front. It was organic. It arose because we were all engaged in frantic political activity prior to a presidential election. And also on the ballot that fall for the November election in California was something called Proposition 14. Proposition that proposed to undo the fair housing law that had been passed by Byron Rumford, who was the first Black person elected in the California legislature. So this was a very intense struggle to make sure that Byron Rumford's fair housing stood. Yeah. So you see, this is an integral part of the civil rights movement also, that fair housing ordinance. So the point about all of this is that this United Front was very organic to the political activity that was already very heated and going on, and everybody was involved in it, and everybody considered this new set of regulations, that is, they were old regulations, but they were being extended to Bancroft and Telegraph. It's just total nuisance. That we needed to get rid of this in order to go on with the real political activity that had to take place prior to the November election.
Husky dogs, it is to have your mind reduced to clay. Civil rights, politics just get in the way. Questioning authority when you should obey.
Sleeping on the lawn in a double sleeping bag doesn't get things done. Freedom is a drag. Chuck your principles, don't stand up and fight. You won't get democracy if you yell all night. Hospitals, pom-pom girls, you see all the way. Oh, what fun it is to have your mind reduced to clay. Civil rights, politics just get in the way. Questioning authority when you should obey. Hey!
The principle that Mario established was that if freedom of speech was the issue and the establishment of tables was the issue, then instead of being on this strip of sidewalk, we should move our tables to the center of Sproul Hall Plaza. Right? We allowed for pedestrian traffic with the tables. So it wasn't just the Congress of Racial Equality. We all had tables there.
And the deans came up to me, asked me if I was aware of university policy. And I said, are you aware that you're violating the Constitution of the United States? So I was cited. There were 8 of us that were cited that day and told to appear before the Dean of Men in Sproul Hall that afternoon at 4 o'clock.
I mean, I knew stuff was happening, and I had sat at tables, and I had been one of those who had signed saying, I sat here too, please take my name. And when we had gone up to the people who had been summoned to the dean's office, and about 200 of us went along to keep them company, and saying, we signed, we were sitting there too, take us. And they said, no, you can't come in. We said, okay, we'll sit here.
What happened was that in the morning, the campus there was this vague frisson of unrest that you could sort of feel. You knew something's like it's fire season. There's going to be an earthquake. There was that funny feeling that something was going to happen. And by the afternoon, it had happened. And when closing time came, we simply stayed. And it turned into a sit-in. We didn't mean it. It was a complete accident. So at 11 o'clock that night, Chancellor Strong came into the building and told us that the 8 students had been indefinitely suspended. So at this point, Clark Kerr starts hearing about things. I think he was back in the country, but he wasn't really paying too much attention. And he said, this is an administrative problem at the university that Strong can deal with. And as it turned out, Strong was probably his own worst enemy. He did everything in his power to show that he was the chancellor, that he was the one negotiating with the students, and continually made end runs around Clark Kerr's thought-out policy. They realized that an ideal time had come to push it and to say, we're going to continue our civil rights activity, and we're going to be handing out our materials that we're going to do right on campus. And so the next day, Jack Weinberg set up with a bunch of people from CORE, set up a table. And at the stroke of noon, he was arrested. And so big, giant, huge mistake number 2 was to bring a cop car on campus. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess they were thinking, well, we need to hustle him about 50 feet, get him in the car, and we'll get out of here.
Jack was a graduate student, but he wasn't going to school that year. The
Use
fact
that.
that he had been there for years didn't make any difference. The fact that he was taking a semester off still made him a non-student.
So not only were there thousands of students out there milling around, wondering what was going on their way to lunch, but there was just enough of a scuffle. Jack went limp, and then 4 cops picked him up and carried him the 50 feet. But by the time they got him into the car, people sort of spontaneously were sitting around. Some people were saying sit down, some people were sitting down, and within a very short period of time, maybe a few minutes, there were enough people surrounding the car where they couldn't possibly move it. And they left it idling for a while and then turned it off. And there it sat for the next 32 hours.
Don't let him get up here. Let him get right on the side of the car.
They won't be able to see him. He's got to get up here.
I pledge not to run away.
We just came up in succession like that. Everybody took off their shoes. We were trying not to damage the police car, which we did. I mean, we dented it. We raised money to have it repaired. I was in charge of the Du Bois Club table, which is why I was so involved in all of this, and my name had been taken by the deans and so forth. And then I was right in front of the police car when someone yelled, "Sit down," which I did. And we sat down, and I think hundreds of people sat down. Anyway, they couldn't move the car, and they gave up trying. And we stayed through the night, and we stayed through the second night. The first day, Mario asked me to go over to San Francisco State because they were having a rally in support of us. And they needed somebody to speak over there who had been involved in our protests. So Mario asked me to do that, and I drove over to San Francisco State, and I spoke at their rally. And then I came back. We were speaking from the top of the police car, and I had something to say. And I remember it as being at night because I couldn't see the students in front of me, and there was a glare from the television lights.
So the defining moment for me was the moment when we were standing there. There was several thousand people sitting in front of us. We were in the first row of people standing, and there was several thousand people standing behind us. I heard the Harley Davidsons of the Oakland meanies revving up on Telegraph, and there was no escape, and we were packed, wall to wall in the plaza. But nobody panicked. We all just sat down. That was when the demonstration, quadrupled in size, because everyone who was standing around, the people sitting down also sat down.
I was there for the fraternities when they showed up. But I saw the whole thing, and there are parts of it, it was not scary. There were more of us than there were of them. They threw not just cigarettes, but eggs as well. Near missed Mario with a couple. It was hysterical to listen to Mario trying to discuss philosophy with a group of drunken, raving fraternity boys. Mario gets up and appeals to them. He asked one of them to come up and speak from the police car, which they had some trouble figuring out whether they should do or not, because their demand was, "Give us our car, we want our car." Your car? It's our car at the moment. And he's discussing Thoreau with them, and that it's possible to break the law for a higher purpose, and this is justified by certain philosophical principles. And these guys were drunk on their asses.
That evening, I saw that all of a sudden a group of pretty rowdy, mostly fraternity students, began harassing the students that had surrounded the car that were sitting around it, and they were throwing eggs at them and bottles. It must have been really late at night, around maybe midnight, and it was a very palpable thing. It had gone from what was essentially a peaceful demonstration, preventing the campus police from removing Weinberg, to the threat of violence against the protesters. I was very concerned, and through my connection with Newman Hall, the Catholic student organization on campus, I knew Father Jim Fisher, who was a young priest in his late 30s. I called him up in the middle of the night with some trepidation because I didn't want to wake up a poor priest, But I said, Jim, I think we have a really bad situation developing here. And I don't know if you could come and do something about it to try to calm things down. I thought, well, maybe fraternity boys would respect a priest.
Easy in a crowd to get carried away.
It's a lot harder to face yourself in the mirror in the morning. I'm not sure of all the issues involved, but I am convinced that in a free society, rational men can discuss and solve their differences without bloodshed. You presumably have come to this university because you are rational men seeking to perfect your rationality. Tonight is your chance to prove it. I have nothing more to say.
He essentially diffused what could have become the start of a riot, and maybe the whole development that came afterward would have changed, because if there had been a riot, the police were ready to come in, and it could have turned into a completely different situation.
You see administration, your clumsy punch card mind has put your back against the wall and tied you in a bind. Yet in the darkness shineth an Oakland cop's flashlight to strengthen all your arguments and prove your cause is right.
That was when Mario came racing across the campus, got up on top of the police car, and announced that there had been an agreement reached between us and the administration. And that stopped the police violence, which I think would have been very horrific. And we formed ourselves that weekend into the free speech movement. And it was Jack Weinberg who came up with the name, as I recall. The demands of the free speech movement were very conservative. And we also dressed in very conservative ways. And all the protests, like when we went to the Regents meeting later in November, there's an iconic photograph of us walking through Sather Gate on our way to the Regents meeting. And I think that was November 20th. You know, we're all, the women like myself, we're all in skirts and dresses and blouses, and Mario and the guys were all wearing suits and ties. And you know, they had short hair. We were just very conservative. We were coming out of the 50s. The Regents meeting was being held at University Hall, which is on Oxford, there on the other side of the campus. And so there's a grassy knoll across the street, and that's where we were in sort of a vigil. And they would not permit us. They wouldn't even permit a spokesperson to come in and represent opposition.
Well, we weren't big enough. That was one of the things that we wanted a real show of force for that. We thought it would be real important to have as many people there as possible. And we were starting to lose a little momentum. Once we got to the Regents meeting, it was a real letdown because they didn't even let us speak and wouldn't let anybody else even speak about the issues. And so we were very disappointed with it. It was a delegation that they would allow, and we elected the delegation. We put together people we thought the Regents would find most acceptable. Like, for instance, we didn't put Bettina on there. But we put in the most conservative people that we thought they would find acceptable, and they still didn't find us acceptable.
Regents were meeting on November 20th, but they had refused to allow representatives to speak before them. They wanted to have a situation that they could control. And it was obvious to me that it was a generational thing occurring here. They didn't understand that this was a different generation of students who had cut their political teeth, so to speak, in the South in the campaign to register Black citizens to be able to vote. As a representative of the interfaith community, I felt that perhaps my role was one to bring opposing sides together. But the campus administration was inept in handling this new element in student unrest, and they fumbled from one impromptu decision to another.
Where they nearly sunk us was saying, okay, you can talk about whatever you want, but you can't advocate illegal actions. What that meant was you can't have a sit-in. You can't have a picket line that might, get out of it. You can't, how repressive that actually was a very difficult point for people to grasp, because the general public would go, well, why do you want to advocate illegal actions? And so would the normal student. And also it was a low point because everybody went home and talked to their parents and found out how hostile the entire state was. Or the way people started having real gut-wrenching arguments with their families. They went home for Thanksgiving. I went home for Thanksgiving. My father he'd been the faculty representative from the South on the committee of that had written the California Master Plan of Education. And he was very happy to have gone to all those meetings with the Regents and Kerr and Buffy Chandler, and he was very proud of that. And there I was,
threatening it,
rebelling against it, and he did not know how to take that.
My parents were getting this kind of misinformation, and they were frantic and calling me from Connecticut saying, oh my God, don't get involved. What are you doing? There's going to be this. And I say, it's really not like that. You're not getting the true story. And no, we're not, beating each other up on the picket lines or whatever you're being told by your mainstream press. That's not what's happening.
There was just incessant unrest on the campus. And every time it started to wind down, the university would do a brand new stupid thing to keep it going. The most notable was when we were ready to have a negotiated peace. We felt we'd lost the support of the student body. We felt that everyone was getting tired of this. It was Thanksgiving vacation, everyone was gone, and we felt we had to negotiate some sort of peace because, of course, nobody can keep this up forever. And it was really cutting into the students' time, professors' time, it was violently disrupting the campus, at which point Strong sent 4 letters out expelling 4 of the students. And that just reignited the powder keg. So we seized on that error.
They figured we were in the middle of finals and people would not pay any attention to anything. And we just said, well, we have to do something. We can't just let this go because they're counting on us losing our momentum, not being able to do anything. And so we just went ahead and called it and did it. And it turned out that we got a lot of support because it made people really mad. I think it's very interesting. The administrators did what happens quite often in other situations. They underestimated the intelligence of regular people. And they figured, they're so stupid, these students, they'll just think about their finals and worry about their grades and not worry about anybody else. But as soon as people heard about the suspensions, they knew the timing of it, they knew what was going on, and people really got mad. So we ended up having over 800 people coming in, sitting in.
As soon as they thought we were weak, they moved in to finish us off by sending the letters to the 4 students to be suspended, and we had them. And we knew we had them. Everyone was just chortling, just full of glee. We've got them, we've got them, we've got them. And we called the rally, and we did the sit-in. Dave Goines got the job of pegging all the locks to Sproul Hall so they couldn't lock us out. And he and his girlfriend had gone around from door to door and made out in the doorway, which guaranteed everyone would look away. And meanwhile, he would shove a matchstick into the lock. The next day I was told, Jack, I want you to go into Sproul Hall and sit in the lobby, be inconspicuous with my armband, buttons, denim jacket, and sleeping bag. Yeah, I'll be very inconspicuous. And if they try and shut the door before the sit-in starts, you leap into the doorway and hold it until reinforcements arrive. So I was sitting there on the floor, glowering, and there were a group of deans and policemen standing around looking at me and laughing themselves half sick. They knew just what I was there for. And, I was being so serious about it. So I was the first. I was in before the songs. I was in before the speeches. And on one piece of tape, I can be heard yelling, the fourth floor is full, the third floor is full, the second floor is full, the whole building is full.
Oh, wow.
I remember saying to Jack Weinberg, as we were talking tactics at some point, they can't arrest a whole building full of people. He said, of course they can.
It was euphoria because, again, we believed we were right. We felt scapegoated. We felt attacked. And here you are, vigorously walking up, to Sproul. And that's just physical. It's same like with the picketing. You're singing and you're walking, and it's very physically invigorating too. And so there were speeches.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Joan Baez came to support us. And right before we started marching into Sproul Hall, she led us in a few songs, spirituals and We Shall Overcome. And so we walked in up the brick steps into the first floor of Sproul Hall, and then we took a right and went up the stairs to the second floor. And so she led us onto the second floor, and we just started filling the building. The first floor, the second floor, the third floor, and the fourth floor. If you look at that picture in the Trouble in Berkeley book, there are 3 windows at the second floor. So we put FSN. And I was right there. I'm in one of those pictures. I was right there. There were 3 balconies and 3 windows. And I was right there in the balcony area. But where I was the center of all the activity. So people were coming up ropes and going down ropes.
Yes.
So, that's what I was sort of taken up with, that kind of stuff, rather than a Hanukkah party or dancing. The second floor was extremely chaotic. And I think there was a lot more peaceful. The third and the fourth floor were much more peaceful. And there wasn't all of that, oh, they're coming now, or what are we going to do? Or, oh, this is the last time, they're going to close the doors, or, oh God, let him come up, get him out, let her go down. It was very chaotic, and there was a lot of activity on the second floor. And when the police came in, they came up that stairway, and right there I was, and they started kicking. And they kicked me in the head. Black boots in the head, and by the time I was arrested and got to Santa Rita, it was a big egg. It was a big egg. They were just like we were a varmint. But at that time, we were so passionate about what we believed. I believe if they took shotguns to us, we'd still stay. We were so dedicated. We had the idealism of youth.
May I have your attention, please? I am Dr. Edward Strong, Chancellor of the Berkeley campus. I have an announcement. This assemblage has developed to such a point that the purpose and work of the university have been materially impaired. It is clear that there have been acts of disobedience and illegality which cannot be tolerated in a responsible educational center and would not be tolerated anywhere in our society.
Except Berkeley.
The university has shown great restraint and patience in exercising its legitimate authority in order to allow every opportunity for expressing differing points of view. The university always stands ready to engage in the established and accepted procedures for resolving differences of opinion. I request that each of you cease your participation in this unlawful assembly. I urge you, both individually and collectively, to leave this area. I request that you immediately disperse. Failure to disperse will result in disciplinary action by the university. Please go.
The cops have taken out their nightsticks. They're pushing on up. They're stepping over people. Hey, hold it. Watch it. Watch it. Those kids, there are just kids sitting there. My God. The California Highway Patrol. Hey, easy does it. Wow. They can make their way through. Easy. Sitting around here. Let's take it here. The California Highway Patrol is making its way up the stairs. It's more like a small army. They seem to be stepping on people, turning over things, and pushing their way on up. The California Highway Patrol, they've grabbed one kid and pushed him down the steps, beating him on the back of the head. There's a kind of gauntlet. They're kicking them and throwing them down the stairs. They're throwing them down the stairs and pushing them down the stairs out of the way. I don't know what's happening to these kids.
So the cops came charging up there, hitting everybody, and everybody was just, what is going on here? And then they started arresting people. And then our goal was to go limp and try to prevent them from arresting us all before campus opened. So we were trying to keep on getting arrested until at least 8 o'clock. And I think we managed to stay until like 10 and we would refuse to give our names. We were doing all sorts of things to try to just screw it up so that it would take a longer time for them to process us. We did. And we had Steve Weissman go down, he shimmied down the front on a bed sheet to go organize the strike while we were inside. We said we had to have somebody from the steering committee outside organizing the strike, and so he was selected to be the person who organized the strike. And
the police struggle and fight their way. And one cop, helmet number 79, Alameda County Deputy Sheriff's, I remember to this day, was swinging his club freely. Kid behind me was wearing a motorcycle helmet. It was cracked by being hit. And another cop grabbed the guy and calmed him down, pulled him back out. But they got to the microphone, they grabbed the microphone, ripped it out, and Ron Anastasi, you have to picture Ron, three-piece suit, always, impeccably dressed, little attaché case, no matter what the circumstance. He's up on the table, he's saying, "Officer, you got the microphone, we're off the air now, you can go, it's okay, you've shut us up." No sooner are they halfway down the stairs than Anastasi looks around, holds up his attaché case, opens it, and takes out another microphone, and we're back on the air. Later, they came up again and pushed through us, and this time they put a line of cops at the windows, pasted paper over the windows, and got the other microphone. The adrenaline started to go down, and I had hardly slept, the night before, and the realization that they'd been arresting people since 2 in the morning. It was now about 10 in the morning, and they were getting down to our floor. So I moved from the head of the stairs over to the hall where they seemed to be coming down the hall. I was sitting, Hilbert Coleman, our song leader, Marvin Garson, Barbara Garson, and myself in that order. Now, Hilbert Coleman was a black guy, and he was our champion song leader. Apparently, he died 5 years ago, which is a great loss. He was one of the valuable men of the FSM. They wanted his ass so bad. He'd been up on the table leading songs for 30 hours, and
Really?
oh yeah, Hilbert was nonstop, and he was brilliant at it. And every demonstration we sang our hearts out through, half of them. Songs are much more important than the speeches in some ways, and keeping our spirits up, keeping us going. Well, they wanted him, and when they got him, they took him hard, and they hammered him as they took him. Smashed him to the floor and roughed him up. And Marv Garson jumped up to intervene, and they smashed him to the floor. And Barbara Garson, who is about 4'3", leapt up and punched a cop. At which point, one of the cops says, "Hey, she hit me." It was like, and little less than Muhammad Ali would have done. So I was the next person, and my first arrest. And Berkeley police sergeant sits down next to me and says, "Son, you're under arrest. What's your name?" He was calm and level. The Berkeley police were always the most professional. This guy was an old salt, and he was not going to get rattled. They were doing this because at Sheraton Palace, they'd had a problem. They'd arrested people, and they had not documented the arrests. So they weren't entirely sure who had been taken, who hadn't, and at the trials, it made for some real problems in prosecution. So this time, they held up a number, and they had you photographed as you were arrested, so they could positively ID each and every individual. So I said, "I want to see some identification. I don't think you guys are acting like peace officers." He said, "Son, I'm in uniform. I don't have to show you identification. I'm Sergeant so-and-so of the Berkeley Police Department. You're under arrest. Now, do you want to go quietly?" And so they dragged me down the stairs, bumpity, and they had my hand in a pain hold, which was impressive. But down in the basement, there was one room that was blocked off with a sliding grate kind of thing. And I could see they had a whole bunch of women in there. They had isolated them and put them in one room. And they were cheering wildly each time someone was dragged through the basement hall. So I wasn't about to stand up and walk at that point. But I got 3/4 of the way down the hall, and I said, I may need this arm tomorrow. So I said, okay, I'll walk. And got on the bus. We went down to Oakland Jail, where about 50 of us were put in a cell that was probably designed for 8. They fed us Army K rations that, as far as we could tell, dated from the Second World War, possibly the First. There was a biscuit in one of the cans we took out that we used to carve FSM 1964, 1,000 arrested into the paint on the side of the cell with the biscuit. It was that hard.
They were not gentle in the arrest. They were not gentle at all. And we were not cooperative. So our going limp provoked the police. We didn't get treated any better than the guys. Yeah, we were dragged, and you could bump your head down every step. And then we were taken out to Santa Rita, and it took forever to get us processed.
Bail was by Jerry Barish. He got blanket bail for all of us. Money was raised from the faculty to cover that. I don't know if my grandparents contributed. Eventually, at probably, the wee hours of the morning, they said, "Okay, you're going to be released. File out here. Get on the bus." And Mal Bernstein jumps on the bus, sticks his head in and says, "Okay, I'm Mal Bernstein. I'm your lawyer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to be taken back to Berkeley. You've all been bailed out. You'll have to appear in an arraignment. We will get your names. We will get you all the information on the arraignment. Are there any questions?" And I put up my hand and said, "What if you're a juvenile?" And he said, I didn't hear that question, and don't ask it again until we are outside of the gates. And I said, what question? I didn't ask anything.
A lot of faculty went to Santa Rita, bailed out students, supported them all the way through. And a lot of it was faculty with their own students. It wasn't just in general. It's they went out to see their people who had been arrested, their graduate students or undergraduates. So it made a tremendous difference.
So yeah, it galvanized the professor community to come and support us. And people drove out to Santa Rita. There were lines and lines and lines of cars waiting to take us back to the campus because we just came back and started right over. We had declared a general strike, and even the labor unions honored our picket lines. And that was really the turning point. That's where really I think that we got enough labor union support and academic support to turn the tide.
We had to organize picket lines because there was going to be a strike. You know, it was called, I believe, initially by the GCC, by the Graduate Coordinating Committee. And someone, probably Bettina and several others, had done a lot of work with the Alameda Labor Council. And the word was they would sanction the strike if the individual drivers of the trucks who made deliveries to the university would honor our picket line. Then they would support us. So we had to get a picket line out there before the first truck came, and it had to be a dense enough picket line so we had some credibility with the person who drove up and saw it. There was enough people picketing to get a picket line, and not a sparse picket line, a dense picket line around every major building on campus. That's a hell of a lot of people. And if you started the 24 hours earlier, you thought everyone was going to Santa Rita, and there would be maybe a handful of people left. So the first building we put the line around was the ASUC because they were getting paper deliveries. I remember seeing the truck turn around. I mean, we knew it was up to the driver, and we knew that it really mattered. And boom, up comes the truck. He looks up. There's a person every 4 feet, with sign. And he's like, that's a picket line. I'm turning around. And he left. And it was like, oh, what a moment. And then the next building was Cowell Hospital, which also got early deliveries, next to the Life Sciences building. $20 bill floats out of the window about, God knows how many, the fifth or more story window, out comes a $20 bill. The money started pouring in. I mean, I was sitting at a table where we collected, the entire table was covered with money. I mean, it was maybe 9 a.m. and the entire table was covered with money. It was just amazing.
The arraignment. We were all requested, I worked in Legal Central too, and we sent out requests to everybody to come to the arraignment, and the lawyers got on their knees and they begged us, please, all the guys, ties and jackets, all the gals, dresses or skirts, please, just this once, only once you'll have to do it. And we all did. Every, 800 people or however many filed in, all dressed very nicely. And then when we were all seated and the proceedings were about to begin, the door opens, and in walks David Lance Goines in blue work shirt, blue jeans, and motorcycle boots, just like every other day, and we rose and gave him a standing ovation.
It's important to point out here that when we first started the free speech movement with our radical tactics and so forth, many faculty who were sympathetic to us in terms of a principle were upset with us for rocking the boat because Clark Kerr had come in as president of the university precisely as a liberal, all right? I use the term advisedly, but that was the idea, as a liberal who had opposed the loyalty oath and would heal the wounds that the loyalty oath had inflicted by allowing faculty who had been fired to come back to the university to teach with their rank, with their prior rank. And so the faculty felt very positive about Clark Kerr and were very worried about us rocking the boat. And of course, it was true we were rocking the boat. And it was also true that Clark Kerr was under tremendous pressure from the right wing people, who really didn't want any concessions to us and just wanted us smashed. And that included Alex Sheriffs, who was the vice chancellor we mentioned before. It also included Ed Strong, who was the chancellor of Berkeley at the time, and really way over his head in terms of trying to deal with this crisis, which is why Kerr came in and took over. And there were right-wing legislators who were pressuring and so forth. So when the decision was made for us to be arrested at Sproul Hall, that decision was not made by Clark Kerr. That decision was made by the governor. It was Edmund G. Brown who ordered the arrests over the objections of Clark Kerr. And that's just the history. That's just what happened. First thing I'd say in terms of faculty support, so remember that I'm 20 at this time, and I'm an undergraduate. So my connections to faculty are fairly limited. It was the graduate students who were most important in mobilizing faculty support, because they were the ones that had the most direct connection to faculty individually. Now, Mario and I met with, not necessarily together, but we met with faculty, like Reggie Zelnick, for example. At that time, John Searle, who was very supportive of free speech movement. Leon Wofsy, who was in the bacteriology department. Jacobus Tenbrook. Tom Parkinson, who was in the English department. These were people that we met with at various times, and they formed the core of a very important faculty group. There was also Henry Rizovsky, who was in the history department, who was sort of on the periphery of this, but became increasingly supportive as time went on. And also an anthropologist named Gerald Berriman was very supportive of the free speech movement. So, we had, and another very supportive person was a man named Michel Loew, who was in the mathematics department, who had been part of the French resistance during the war. He was very radical. He was a wonderful man, wonderful, wonderful man. I met with him a lot.
And you had some people who were connected with the loyalty oath controversy.
Yes, well, that was like Parkinson, Tom Parkinson, for example, absolutely, and I think Tenbrook as well. Yes, absolutely, and Leon Wofsy came from he hadn't been in the communist movement for a long time, but he had been very active in the YCL.
So the loyalty oath was a very big thing, which everybody knew about, even though it had already been largely resolved by the time I got to Berkeley. And a number of the people who were very active ultimately in defense of the students and of the free speech movement were people who themselves had been fired because of the loyalty oath and then rehired. So it was a very strong element in the consciousness of the Berkeley faculty before the free speech movement ever started. Very few of the faculty members appreciated what was happening initially. When the car was surrounded, there were a few faculty members, I think John Searle in the first place, who got up on the car and recognized what was happening, and especially appreciated what the nature of the controversy was at that point, because these students had come, as is well known now, from the heroic freedom voting movement in the South that summer, and were certainly idealistic, impassioned, and not ready to simply drop their beliefs and their right to speak simply because of institutional rules and regulations. Anyway, that all changed when the administration remained very obstinate Chancellor Strong in the first place, and particularly when the major events took place of the occupation of Sproul Hall and the eventual arrests. And that was the point at which the faculty went into shock and, to their credit, recognized that the fight was a good fight, that they should be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I would say a majority of the faculty moved over to the side of the students, ultimately culminating in the Committee of 200 and the plan that it put forward that served as a basis for an overwhelming vote in the academic senate that represented the victory of the free speech movement.
Most of the people, really articulate opponents of the FSM in the faculty senate, were Europeans who, rightly or wrongly, saw the FSM as a kind of proto-fascist movement, that students had reacted against the Weimar Republic, and they didn't like the Weimar Republic, and a lot of their rhetoric they saw as being similar to the FSM rhetoric. I never thought for a second there was any danger of the FSM going fascist. I think that was a misperception. I mean, I don't want to say I laughed off what people like Foyer was saying, because these were good people, and it was a shame they left. And they sincerely believed it, and so I had to listen with a certain amount of respect. But I never believed it for a second. And Mario, of all the people, I mean, Mario was one. I don't want to be a leader. Don't always choose me. We don't have a leader in this movement. He's an anti-Hitler.
Although the final turning point came at the Greek Theater. And that's where, once again, while supposedly the atmosphere was one of dialogue and discussion, that wasn't supposed to embrace the free speech movement. That wasn't supposed to be one that allowed another voice, just the voice of officialdom.
We heard all these boring speeches about now this is a new era and we will have freedom under law.
Salvio got up and walked to the podium, and as he stood at the podium, two campus policemen tackled him and dragged him off stage.
Mario came out to say a word or two, and regardless of what he was going to say, the facts were the police threw him to the ground, really roughed him up, put a baton on his neck so that he couldn't speak, and I was about 8 yards away.
I want every person here to know and understand fully what just occurred when the president of this university finished speaking. I was with Mario. Mario went backstage before the meeting began and spoke with the chairman of the meeting, Professor Scalapino, and requested to be permitted to speak. He did not want to make a long and involved speech. Mario left his seat in the front of the Greek Theater and walked quietly and with dignity, and I was with him, up upon the stage. When Mario approached the microphone, he never was given even the opportunity to say anything, but was seized by the police and brought backstage. After great response from the audience, he was permitted to make the announcement he wanted to make, He was released by the police, and he is here now.
It was a horrifying thing to watch. And it was especially meaningful because there's all this talk about freedom under law. And then the law comes out and they put Mario down on the ground with a stick on his neck. It was a metaphor. It just summed up what was wrong with the present situation.
And the point again of the intervention of treating free speech and demand for free speech by simply demanding silence and force, I think that's what finally really swung the tide.
You have to think the gods have smiled. I mean, how could you possibly have staged it better than that? And all the professors, barring a few, who had been anti-student, who had said, well, we grudgingly know that we have to end this conflict, and that the easiest way to end it is to side with the students, a profound number of them came over to the student side, right there on the spot.
The whole idea of the Greek theater was a very obvious attempt to try and regain control over a situation. And I don't think I was very hostile to that, because all of us could see that although Strong was certainly doomed, that Kerr was also at risk. And I probably went into the Greek theater thinking we have to get everything back to normal to save Kerr. But that's not the way I exited the Greek theater. No, I exited the Greek theater. You've got to do something about these people who will just knock you down and use a baton on you. So.
I think it's quite clear that our struggle has just begun. The very fact that something like 810 students are about to face some courts here in Alameda County, I think constitutes a definite threat to the civil rights movement, and we're going to have to pull together in order to support these students so that we can continue to maintain the civil rights movement here in Northern California.
People knew where our position was, and so I was invited to go to this committee of 200. It's an arbitrary name. There were a bunch of people in the hall. And Charlie Sellers and Charles Muscatine and John Searle and Reggie Zelnick and Bill Kornhauser and Kenneth Stamp had put together this resolution. It was debated at the meeting. And my first speech on this whole topic was at that meeting. It was very short. I put up my hand and I said, I think you have to put in something more about respecting whatever it was about the students. It was a plug for acknowledging the role of the students a bit more. And for that, I was invited to the next drafting session of the committee of 200, the executive committee, as they called themselves.
So when the academic senate met, and the vote was 824 to 115 to support the demands of the free speech movement, which meant freedom of speech without restriction, no penalties, and the only regulations would be of time, place, and manner. That was all. No regulation of content, and that it also meant that you could bring speakers to the campus, you'd have freedom of speech, and that the First Amendment would be honored, the 14th Amendment would be honored just as it was on the campus, just as it was anywhere else in the United States, that there would not be restrictions. That's what they were voting on. And that's how they voted. And that Senate meeting was historic, and everybody knew it. And when the faculty came out, we were standing outside, and they had broadcast, they had microphones set up so we could hear. And when the faculty came out and we started to applaud as they came out, many of them were crying. These old men were crying. And the reason was that we all understood, I think in that moment, that it had broken the back of that kind of McCarthyite repression that had so terrified people.
There was a feeling of elation. I mean, you know, it wasn't just that the mood shifted, that the cause became theirs, at least on the part of a large section of faculty. So the victory wasn't just a victory for somebody else, it was a victory for very basic ideals and beliefs that were being joined in this battle. And I remember that very well. I mean, you know, in a certain sense, you know, maybe faculty shouldn't have taken as much credit as it did, because it came in as sort of Johnny-come-latelys for the most part. But still, it got there, and it did what it was supposed to do. It did the good fight, as Reggie Zelnick called it in his book. And they felt pride. They were excited. They were elated.
The overwhelmingly one-sided vote on December 8th was because of what happened in the Greek theater. Remember, we were all there. It was a university event. It wasn't like going to hear a rock star or something. That was our job, was to go up and be told we were starting a new era of freedom under law. I think a lot of people really wanted to get the whole thing behind them as quickly as possible because they didn't like all this turmoil in Sproul Plaza.
The faculty voted overwhelmingly to side with the students, and the administration, also very weary of the fight, realized that they were probably losing court, and it was gonna head for court. We had the ACLU was on our side. We knew that we might have lost the immediate battle on the campus for free speech rights, but we would certainly win it in court, and the administration knew that also. The university's council told them, if this goes to court, it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and you're going to lose, and it's going to cost you a bloody fortune.
Yes, I think the administration did realize that Strong was a liability and decided to replace him with Meyerson. It was a difference in tone, and it was a concession to us in a certain sense that Strong had not been able to handle the free speech movement in a satisfactory way. Meyerson came in and spoke on the steps of Sproul Hall and announced that for a certain period of time every day it would be a free speech area. However, there was a caveat with that, and that was how I got thrown out of school 3 more times, because I spoke over an illegal microphone. They would not allow us to use microphones. They told us we could use bullhorns, but we could not use generator-powered microphones. And so, but of course nobody could hear you if you had a bullhorn, so we always used the illegal microphones. So many of us were thrown out of school because of that.
views on the FSM is it's like your basic soap opera plot. You have a family, something goes drastically wrong, then the story is about how do you bring the family back together. That's the plot of every soap opera in America. But that was also the plot of the FSM in terms of the university's consciousness of itself and its community as an educational institution.
And then the Regents, because of the faculty vote and because of the mobilization of huge numbers of people, including the labor councils and the Democratic Party and people like Willie Brown and the whole civil rights movement, because of that national mobilization, the Regents were forced then to concede that their regulations would not go beyond the purview of the First and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. So we won that. And that rule then swept across the country. That's the positive. Everywhere across the country, administrators began to change their rules as the students mounted protests. So we gave license to that. And I remember touring the country with Mario, and I think Suzanne was with us. And no matter where we went, thousands of students came, faculty came, standing ovations before we ever said anything. We were just, I remember being at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I remember being at Queens College. I remember Mario was at Columbia. I think he went to Harvard. No matter where we went, there were these huge crowds and huge reception that we received. So that mobilized. That was very important. A rolling impact.
Yeah.
And I think it also influenced the Civil Rights Act of '65, the Voting Rights Act, because it created a certain momentum in the country. It shifted the country in a certain direction for a period of time. So I think it was very, very positive. On the negative side, in the gubernatorial race in '68, when Edmund G. Brown was up for re-election, he was opposed by Ronald Reagan. And Reagan apparently decided that he should pound the issue of student protests. And students were out of hand and so forth. A lot of his advisors thought he was nuts, that it was a non-issue, a non-starter, but he insisted, and he was right. Reagan insisted that this was a sledgehammer that he could use to win the governor's race, and he did. It was not the only sledgehammer, but it was a big one that he used. And so, part of what happened then, you can say, is that as a consequence of our movement, the student agitation and student movement, Reagan was elected governor, which gave him entree into the presidency.
I know.
So nobody could have predicted that. Nobody could have seen that. Nobody could have known that kind of backlash was going to come. So that's how I would assess it. It was a huge movement. It had a huge impact. It deeply impacted the people who were involved in it. It had a profound impact on universities across the country in the months after it was over. And it influenced a lot of what happened in Europe in the spring of '68, in Paris, and also, I might add, in Prague. The Prague Spring was in '68. And these were worker-student coalitions, groups. The French almost overturned, both almost overturned their governments. And of course, the Prague Spring ended with the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia.
I think there's no question that the free speech movement sparked similar movements everywhere. They developed their own form, and so the free speech movement can't claim credit for them. But very definitely the free speech movement emboldened and encouraged similar movements everywhere. First of all, on our own campuses, Stanford, Columbia. I visited Michigan State at that time to give a seminar and saw a similar movement there, Wisconsin. But beyond that, internationally, certainly the movements that took place in 1968 in France were very much influenced. They went beyond. They were much more political in character in terms of society in general. But certainly the spirit was one that was a wave that started with the free speech movement.
Mm-hmm.
And it also extended to movements in Czechoslovakia and elsewhere in Eastern Europe. It was free speech. The issue was precisely the issue that that students and the university were not in an ivory tower, and part of being a good student, or for that matter, as it turns out, a good faculty member, was to be concerned with your community, with your country, with what goes on in the world, and not to view being in the university as a vacation from life. So that's the fundamental issue. And it's quite interesting that generation after generation, it's frequently the young people who kick over the traces and bring about change. So to operate on the basis that young people have to be a silent generation and shut up actually goes not against the young people, but it goes against the whole way in which a country or a university refreshes itself and gets new ideas. So that was our outlook at the time.
I do see that whole FSM experience at Berkeley was important in itself, important for Berkeley. And John Searle saw it as being important for speech, but I think it was also a moral test of America, because this was at a time of the freedom rides and the concerted effort to end Jim Crow in the South. And what really gave rise to the FSM was the efforts of CORE and people to have a table and to mobilize for that. It wasn't just free speech in an abstract way, it was free speech as a way of implementing a major change for the status of blacks in this country.
The free speech movement did overcome for me the anonymous feeling. I was connected to a group of people who were doing something more than themselves. I think that's the really huge lesson of being political and getting involved in a political movement, is the experience of being part of something greater than oneself. When people are in movement, when people are in motion, people organize themselves into the needed committees and the needed tasks. It gave me, the FSM sort of gave me a faith in that concept.
It's often overlooked, but that did something for the idea of the university that was really quite important. It's a place of learning, not just a place of expertise. It was a place of community. So, yes, I made many friends. People could respect each other. You know, they did something else for me because I was self-conscious about my background, not apologetic about it, even though I changed my mind, which I had the absolute right to do about many things that I believed as a young person. But I wasn't at all apologetic about thinking for myself what I had done, how I spent my life. Nevertheless, the whole impact of McCarthyism, loyalty oaths, were one where you felt a little bit like a pariah. And that influenced my own behavior to some extent. And the students did me a heck of a big favor by sort of putting all that stuff aside and getting to what really counts.
A real democracy is really important for having a movement. If you really have a democratic organization, it really strengthens your fight, because not only do people feel they have a stake in what's going on because they've contributed to it, but they contribute many wonderful, interesting ideas that you might never come up with, you know, because everybody brings their own experiences to bear.
The encouragement that it gave us was, you can do anything. You may be 19 years old, but you can do anything. And that's what enabled people like Alice Waters to open a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
That she didn't wonder whether someone who was 23 years old could go out there and change the world. She knew she could. We just went ahead and did it. And huge numbers of things that happened as a result of that empowerment of my generation in many, many, many ways, in music, in the arts, in sciences. We could do anything, and we knew we could do anything because we'd done it.
I'm very happy to have been involved in it and to have contributed something towards it. And I think it showed the main thing that I try to say to my students today is it is possible to make social change. It is possible to mobilize huge numbers of people and at least temporarily shift the balance of power so that you can actually get a progressive change.